Hello, everyone, and welcome. It's really great to have you here with us. Did you know that South Africa has a very sophisticated but highly approachable Ombud system, which has been put in place to protect consumers when things go wrong? So, today we're unpacking what the system really means in practice. Whether you're a financial advisor or a trustee, how can you help those end consumers that you serve? And to do that, we've brought together perspectives from across the ecosystem. So I am joined by a panel of esteemed individuals within the system. We have with us Leanne Jackson, who's the Chief Ombud of the Ombud Council. Joining us as well is Sipati Nekondela, who's the Director for Financial Sector Development at the National Treasury. And last but not least, we are joined by Alicia Moses, who is the Manager for Consumer Education at the FSCA. So, a warm welcome to Asset TV, ladies.
Hi, Miss
Thank you.
Edie. Good to be here.
Thank you.
So, Sipati, let me start with you and take a step back. If we had to look back at some of the frustrations that were in the old systems, what were some of the frustrations that consumers were facing, and why was it necessary to kind of give the system a rethink and a slight overhaul?
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Sidi. And I think I'm going to just take this back to where, as at the National Treasury, particularly in the financial sector policy unit, start. So our base is whenever we working, we're doing our work. The start for us is the 2011 policy document, which set out the proposed financial sector reforms. And in that, included the Twin Peaks framework, and strong emphasis was placed on market conduct, consumer protection, and financial inclusion. And as you may be aware, so previously we used to have, prudential regulation as a key element of financial sector regulation. So with these reforms, we were also elevating these priorities alongside prudential regulation. And the Ombud system is a pillar of South Africa's market conduct framework, which was first mentioned or elevated as we were, working, setting out the reforms in the Financial Sector Regulation Act. And back in 2017, we also, put it in the policy document, a known and trusted Ombud system for all, that aimed to create, that put forward the intention to create a simpler, stronger, and more accessible Ombud system. Fast forward to 2021, where National Treasury and the FSCA also commissioned a published World Bank diagnostic, which was titled Financial Ombud System Diagnostic, which made recommendations for reform and strengthening the Ombud system, and which, once fully implemented, would significantly impact the structure of the Ombud system and, the work that's been done by Leanne in terms of the functions of the Ombud Council. And one of the recommendations of those that were in the World Bank report was around the consolidation of the fragmented Ombud system, which at the time we had about 7, and we're hoping to then, with the reforms, to get to 2 schemes. In 2024, again, the National Treasury responded to the diagnostic recommendation with a policy paper, a simple, stronger financial sector Ombud system. And just to get back to your question, I think from a Treasury perspective, the issue was not that the individual Ombud schemes that were there were not functioning, but that the system as a whole was not, had become too fragmented and difficult for consumers to navigate. So, an ordinary consumer could be required to engage multiple schemes depending on whether the issue related to advice, a product, or a particular service provider. And in practice, this creates a real barrier to access, especially for lower income consumers, or those who are less familiar with how the system works. So, from a treasury perspective, a recourse system cannot build trust if consumers have to it, first have to decode it before they can use it. So, the reform is therefore about creating a system that is simpler, more accessible, and easier to use in practice, but also still ensuring that it's independent and it's also fair. I've also touched a bit on on our low income consumers. So just to link it back to the inclusion agenda and objective. So in South Africa currently we have very high levels of financial inclusion, in the fact that financial customers have access to financial services, but access to financial services on its own is not enough. So consumers need to know that if something goes wrong, there is a clear, accessible path to resolve it. And they need to understand that they have a right to complain. Because without that, participation in the financial system can feel risky or uncertain. So, strengthening the Ombud system is part of creating an environment where consumers can engage more confidently, knowing that their rights are protected and that there is credible avenue for recourse. So, I think at a broader level, the Ombud system plays an important role in indicating and highlighting for the regulators as well as for the policymakers where customer outcomes are not aligned with expectations, which in turn supports better conduct across the system. So Msidi, just to close off, to say that the reform is really about improving access to redress, strengthening trust in the system, and also supporting more meaningful participation of customers in the financial system.
Fantastic. Thank you for that very comprehensive context, Sipati. Now, Leanne, coming over to you, you as the Ombud Council serve as the kind of overarching body that overlooks the schemes. But oftentimes there's often this misconception that you are the council is the place where the disputes are actually decided and dealt with. And what is your role relative to the Ombud schemes, and how do you ensure that the system works effectively overall?
Hi, thanks very much, Mercedes. That's an important question. It's important to understand what the Ombud Council does, but also what it does not do. So to start with what we don't do, we are not a dispute resolution forum ourselves. We don't deal with complaints directly. We're not an appeal body for the ombuds. We're not an escalation body on individual complaints. We're a regulator. We're there to exercise oversight over the functioning of the ombud system. So we oversee the conduct of the ombud schemes themselves. The important entities from the consumer's perspective are those ombud schemes. That's who the consumer must be talking to if they have a complaint. The Ombud Council's job is to see that all those excellent intentions that Sepati has summarized from a policy perspective are indeed delivered by the Ombud system, that financial customers do have access to an alternative dispute resolution system that is independent, that is fair, that is accessible. The beauty of the South African financial ombud system is that on top of all of that, these ombuds are completely free of charge. So it's an important benefit of dealing with a regulated financial institution that you get this completely free additional layer of comfort that if things do go wrong, you have access to experts, independent, objective complaint resolution resources. So that's important. Now, turning to what the Ombud Council does do, as I say, we're a regulator. We actually, people don't always realize that we actually have the same rulemaking, enforcement, and supervision powers as the FSCA itself has. It's just that the FSCA's powers relate to the financial institutions themselves, whereas our powers relate to ombuds. So we, for example, just as the FSCA can make binding legislation in the form of conduct standards, binding subordinate legislation, the Ombud Council can and has made binding instruments for ombud schemes called Ombud Council rules. So those are one tool we use to regulate and ensure effectiveness of the ombud system. We also have a responsibility in line with this policy intent of a more structured and cohesive ombud system. We also have a responsibility to look at streamlining and aligning the processes and practices of ombud schemes. So we work on that as well. We have a responsibility to promote awareness of the ombud system and the schemes, which is one of the reasons we are talking to you today and are on this platform, is to promote an understanding of what the ombud schemes can do for people. And we see that as an important part of supporting broader financial inclusion objectives. But importantly, we monitor the complaint trends and the complaint data that's coming from that ombud system. So it's not just about counting the number of complaints, but identifying the underlying conduct risks that the complaint data is revealing. So we do see ourselves as working closely with the National Treasury, the FSCA, and other regulatory bodies to help develop appropriate responses, evidence-based responses to where things are going wrong in practice for financial customers. But no, we don't deal with complaints. So what we will do, however, is if we receive a complaint that a ombud scheme is not following the relevant legislative or other rules that govern its processes, if they're not adhering to those, if they're doing something fundamentally incorrect, then we can and do investigate, but we can't get involved in the merits of an individual complaint. So if an ombud scheme has found in favor of a financial institution and not upheld an individual's complaint, we cannot get involved in that, because one of our responsibilities is to protect the independence of the ombud schemes. So it would be a complete contradiction if we could start intervening in those individual disputes.
Yeah, and it's so great to be having this conversation with you, and also to learn about the independence that you guys kind of are there to govern. And also, oftentimes, consumers resort to seeking legal action on their own individual accord. But it's great today to be learning that there actually is systems in place that can help you before seeking legal recourse. Now, I want to delve in a little bit more into understanding how the system is actually performing in practice. So, Leanne, since the National Financial Ombud was established, hundreds of millions of rands have been, returned to consumers. Now, what do those numbers actually tell you, about what's happening in the market? And could you maybe just, paint a picture of us of what were some of those drivers of the need to return this money to consumers?
You mentioned that the National Financial Ombud returns, but the same is true of the other ombud schemes that we oversee. So there's the National Financial Ombud, which deals with complaints against banks, credit providers, and all types of insurers, life and non-life insurers. But also under our remit is the Phase Ombud, which is the formal name is the Ombud for Financial Service Providers, which looks after complaints in relation to advice. That is a statutory ombud scheme. And also the Pension Funds Adjudicator, who, as you're aware, and as all the trustees will be well aware, deals with complaints in relation to pension funds. Collectively, in the 24-25 year, those schemes returned almost 500 million rand to complainants. Figures for and that included dealing with approximately 50,000 formal complaints over that period. The number is actually slightly understated because it does not include complaints. It only includes complaints where the order sounded in money. Many complaints are resolved by the Ombud scheme giving an instruction back to the financial institution that it should go back and take action of some sort, if not necessarily a financial payment, particularly in the case of the pension funds adjudicator. So the real value is greater. We also, as I said, are waiting still the 2025 numbers obviously being finalized for the schemes, but all indications are that it's going to be substantially higher than that. So I think what this tells us is that there is clear demand for the service, and the sheer volumes. I think to me the most telling thing is the volume of complaints. Tells us that there's demand for these services. I'm hoping it also means that our awareness creating efforts are paying off and people are aware. And generally, I think we all know that consumers are becoming increasingly interested in their rights. So the points Sepati made about how important it is that customers know that they are entitled to fair treatment, and I'm happy to talk a bit later if we have time as to exactly what fair treatment means, that they're entitled to fair treatment and they must complain when they are not receiving fair treatment. And that's what the Ombud system is really there for.
Thank you so much. Now, Alicia, I'd like to bring you into the conversation. You have a very good vantage point at the FSCA in terms of kind of overlooking different parts of the system. And we know that COFI is quite a big regulatory change that is to be coming into effect. But even ahead of COFI being finalized, there is a shift that seems to be towards, as Sipati said, an outcome-based and data-driven approach to supervision. What are your reflections and what does it mean for consumers?
Thank you, Musidi, and hello again to my fellow panelists. So let me spill the tea on Kofi. Even ahead of the Conduct of Financial Institutions Bill, the FSCA's shift towards an outcome-based, data-driven model is fundamentally about strengthening trust and fairness and accountability in this financial sector that we find ourselves in. For customers specifically, this means clearer protection, more transparent products, early intervention when risks emerge, like Sipati mentioned, because we're increasingly supervising based on real evidence of how firms treat their clients rather than relying only on paperwork or rules based checks. So, for institutions, the shift encourages a more proactive, activity based approach to conduct. It supports innovation, particularly as digital and AI enabled services grow. And I'll chat a bit about that later, while still requiring firms to demonstrate that their products, advice, and governance consistently deliver good outcomes. So ultimately, this transition positions both customers and institutions to benefit from a more modern, transparent, and responsive conduct framework, well aligned with the principles that COFI will then formalize.
Fantastic. And Leanne, coming to you, how do you ensure that the Ombud system, keeps pace with this shift with Kofi coming and continues to support how you identify and manage conduct risk?
It's a big journey, and we're helping to support the journey in terms of the policy proposals the Treasury has put out. On the immediate day-to-day front, I think what both Sipati and Alicia have highlighted is this is not about monitoring complaints for complaints' sake. It's about doing deep dives into what is the underlying behavior of financial institutions and other external factors that is actually deriving inappropriate outcomes for customers, and enabling the regulators and the policymaker, like in the case of National Treasury, to be able to have evidence to justify the need for interventions as opposed to anecdotal information. So we do spend a lot of time looking at what is the complaint information telling us and how can the Ombud system's learnings help inform the regulators and policymakers to intervene. Musidi, I'd like to give some practical examples of where the Ombud Council and the Ombud schemes are using the learnings from the Ombud system to help inform appropriate responses from a policy perspective and for the regulators when we identify specific types of underlying conduct risks. So one example, for instance, is the terrible problem South African consumers are experiencing at the moment in relation to digital banking fraud. Huge volumes of complaints on this point are coming through into the banking division of the NFO. So what we have done is pull together engagements between the NFO and the Financial Sector Conduct Authority to give them structured data on the nature and types of banking fraud that is taking place, and the responses of the banks, what is working, what is not working, what are the observations of the NFO in relation to that, so that we can assist through the Ombud data, assist the FSCA in the work it is doing in trying to address the risks of online harm that financial customers are experiencing. We all know that in some instances, the banks may have been able to do a bit more to assist, and Ombud examples will do that. In other instances, it's pure third-party fraud, and the banks themselves are also victims of this fraud. But to come up with structured interventions, this information, real-life information from the Ombud system helps. Another example is in relation to complaints about debt counseling in the credit space. This forms a high percentage of complaints to the credit division of the NFO. In terms of the current legislative framework, though, debt counseling does not fall within the scope of the FSCA's responsibilities, and falls outside the legislative framework, which means the Ombud system also can't assist with those complaints. But instead of just ignoring the problem, what the NFO is doing with the facilitation of the Ombud Council is to nonetheless pull together data and information and examples of situations that they're seeing in the debt counseling space, and working with the National Credit Regulator to enable the National Credit Regulator to have deeper insight into some of the underlying practical effects of the misconduct of debt counselors. A third example is in the financial advice space, where the phase Ombud picks up a lot of examples, again, practical examples of poor advice, and in particular contraventions and sometimes fraudulent conduct committed by financial advisors. And again, we have facilitated more structured engagement between the phase Ombud and the enforcement team at the FSCA to enable them to intervene. And then fourthly and lastly, Sepati had earlier mentioned the high percentage of complaints around funeral insurance. Both the life division of the NFO and the phase Ombud receive a high percentage of complaints relating to funeral policies, both the structure of the products and also mis-selling and inappropriate advice on these products. So again, the Ombud Council is participating in the work that the FSCA and the Prudential Authority are doing to try to come up with a better regulatory framework for funeral insurance. And we are hopeful that the information coming from the real lived experience of complainers in the Ombud system can feed into finding effective solutions to make that framework work better. So those are just some ways of complaint data being used to be forward-looking, as opposed to just the redress responses that Sepati spoke about. And then just also in terms of the Ombud system keeping up with the broader regulatory changes, the COFI bill is going to introduce new areas of work for the FSCA in terms of bringing new forms of activities into the scope of the FSCA's mandate that have not been dealt with directly before. So this includes, for example, the regulation of non-bank payment service providers and entities like debt collectors, who will now be brought into the net. So it's important that the Ombud system is also evolves to be able to provide alternative dispute resolution for those entities. So we are, together with the National Treasury, some engagements are being set up with different stakeholders and regulators in those sectors to say, how can we work together to also make sure that the Ombud system expands to keep up with that. So there's lots to be done to make sure that the Ombud schemes and the Ombud system remains relevant and fit for purpose as the broader consumer protection framework evolves.
Great stuff. Now, coming to you, Alicia, and I think it's quite opportune that we're having this conversation right now because March is World Consumer Rights Month, and the focus this year is on turning the tide against unfair business practices. From where you sit, how, Leanne pointed to how these risks are becoming incredibly sophisticated, and we're no longer just dealing with unfair hidden terms in a small font. We're talking about AI driven scams and phishing as well. Where do you think consumers are most vulnerable, and in light of this World Consumer Rights Month, how should the FSCA, or how are you responding to some of these risks?
The important part is that unfair business practices today are no longer limited to just hidden fees or poor disclosure. As you've mentioned now, digital has just introduced a whole new world of opportunity to exploit trust before consumers even realize that harm is actually taking place. So, in terms of some of the trends or the growing patterns that we're seeing fake investment platforms, cloned websites, impersonation of authorized institutions or advisors, phishing and vishing, online harm. Leanne emphasized this increase in banking fraud that we're also seeing, relationship investment scams and crypto-related scams, the increasing use of AI-enabled, and I speak of deception, and this includes deepfake videos, fabricated endorsements. Additionally, some social media influencers are also providing financial advice without the proper authorization. And this now misleads consumers because they actually follow and believe these influencers, and this therefore influences their behavior or their financial behavior. What makes this particularly concerning is that these scams, as you say, are no longer easy to identify. They often look professional, they mimic real institutions, and they deliberately create urgency, fear, or the promise of unusually high returns. This is exactly why consumer protection today must evolve beyond the traditional disclosure and move into digital vigilance, verification, and prevention. In terms of what the FSA is doing about this or in response to this, the FSA runs a number of financial education initiatives highlighting risks and has additionally also issued out specific warnings about things such as fake investment schemes using deepfake videos of prominent South Africans, including the misuse of trusted public figures to make fraudulent offers appear legitimate. In those warnings, the FSA is urging consumers to rather verify the registration of the entity that you are dealing with before investing. Be cautious of social media promotions and unsolicited offers, this exclusive deals on WhatsApp or Telegram, thinking that you are part of an exclusive group, and then to also look at guaranteed high returns as a major red flag. Now, in one of our integrated report at the FSA, we've recorded over 104 scam warnings, and this was up from 47 in the previous year. So this is a strong indicator of how visible and persistent scam-related risks remain in the market. So in terms of where consumers are most at risk, they're most at risk where there is financial pressure or stress, a desire for quick returns and quick solutions to alleviate that stress or pressure, low awareness of how to actually verify a provider, financial services provider or an advisor, high emotional manipulation, especially where offers are positioned as urgent, exclusive, too good to miss, and increasing reliance on digital channels without enough verification. From a consumer education perspective, that's why our role is not only to warn consumers after the fact, but this is the stance we're actually taking going forward. We want to equip consumers, and that's you and I as well, to ask better questions before committing and parting with your money. So the questions can be, is the provider you're dealing with authorized? What are they authorized to give advice on and sell you? Is the offer realistic? Can I verify this independently? And do I know where to go if something actually goes wrong?
Alicia, one of the key changes that you've made as well is the introduction of the Financial Education Commitment Charter. It's obviously a relook on what financial education or consumer financial education is. Can you tell us a little bit about why that change and why now?
The charter that you're referring to, the Financial Education Commitment Charter, how this all came about is that we've realized that financial education and literacy in South Africa is not a one-man band. It's not something that the FSCA must do, or the Ombud must do, or the Ombud Council must do, or even National Treasury. This is something that must be done collectively, to unite our forces, our energies, and have direct and targeted efforts towards financial literacy and education. The charter, or the main aim of the charter, was to elevate the discussion and call for the embedment of financial education within financial institutions, but not just as a nice to have or a tick box, but to actually embed into their very DNA from a strategic perspective. So it represents that deliberate shift in how we think about financial education, because it has often been treated as a nice to have, it's sometimes fragmented, it's voluntary, or it's positioned as a side initiative. The charter helps us move beyond that. It reinforces financial education not just as a nice to have, but as a core building block of a fair, inclusive, and trusted financial system. And at its core, the charter is basically about building that shared commitment, as I've mentioned, across the financial ecosystem. And the purpose of this is to improve the quality, the reach, relevance, accessibility of financial education in a more coordinated and measurable way. Noting that the charter not only works independently, we're working very closely with National Treasury in terms of their national strategy for financial education, their policy, subsequent implementation plan that's yet to come, and the conduct standard for financial education and pending guidance note as well. But I'll chat to the conduct standard a bit later.
Leanne, picking up from what Alicia has mentioned, there should be a priority on the consumer side and financial services providers or advisors, for instance, to deal with licensed financial services providers.
Thank you, Mercedes. I think that it really is an important point. One of the key advantages of dealing with a licensed financial entity, financial advisor, or financial institution is, firstly, you have the knowledge that they're credible, that they're regulated by the FSCA or the National Credit Regulator, as the case may be, which in itself is advantageous. But you also get this additional layer of protection of having access to dispute resolution completely free through the financial sector ombud system. Whereas if you deal with an unregulated, unlicensed entity or individual, one of the risks you face is you don't have that additional safety net of recourse through the system. So I really think it's part of the messaging that I know Alicia and team at the FSCA are doing, is to help people understand the importance of dealing with properly regulated entities, because, as I say, you get this additional benefit as well. So I think that is important.
And Sipati, from your view, thanks, Leanne, and from your view or from your vantage point at Treasury, how important is this, the credibility of the organization that a consumer is dealing with?
Financial institutions are often the first point of contact, and for us, they are well placed to inform consumers about the complaints process, explain how the internal resolution works, and make them aware of the Ombud system as a free and independent avenue for redress. So making customers aware of their right to complain and how to do so is part of fair treatment. And seen in that light, promoting access to the Ombud system is not a risk to the financial institution. In fact, it is part of demonstrating a commitment to fairness, transparency, and accountability. It also helps to build trust, because customers then know that they are dealing with a credible and an independent process if there is a need for them to access it. So framing the complaints, the Ombud system, and really seeing the complaints process not just as issues to be resolved, but as an opportunity to improve customer outcomes and reinforce fair treatment across the customer journey. So that's how we see it. And it is part of deepening financial inclusion and really strengthening and improving, market conduct and fair conduct of consumers.
And Alicia, like you've touched on quite in depth around the work that you're doing to protect the rights of consumers, but a large number of our audiences are trustees and financial advisors. In your view, how should they be rethinking their approach, especially when it comes to consumer rights, fairness, and the ability to allow, say, members to complain?
What's really important here is that these channels exist and they are that point of contact for the consumer, as the party has mentioned. And if they want to build trust with their consumer or their financial customer, you are open, you are honest, and you explain what the processes are, how things work. You provide information, but not only that, you make sure that the information you're providing is very relatable, very understandable, explained in simple lingo, also in the home language of the person receiving that information. So from your side as that intermediary, you convey information, but then you also assess some understanding. So you ask consumers probing questions. Did you understand what I meant by this? Do you understand the implications? I think that fairness was now mentioned, that transparency, that trust, that just being authentic and just being true to the consumer in terms of what their needs are and what you can provide them with to help them in terms of their financial journey in life, matching with their needs, but also matching with their budgets. So financial institutions, trustees, and advisors must ensure that they establish strong governance, oversight, and accountability structures when developing and executing initiatives. And they must ensure that the content, as I've mentioned, is very objective, appropriate, and not driven necessarily by marketing motives. Programs must also be tailored to the literacy levels, the cultural context, the specific financial needs of these target audience. I mentioned now matching your needs to your budget, not just buying. I mean, we're having an issue now where a lot of people in South Africa are buying multiple funeral policies and not realizing that if you bought multiple policies from one provider, you'll only get a payout of a maximum of 100,000 per person per provider insured. So do you really need multiple financial or funeral products where one can do the job? And do you understand that one that you have, you will pay the admin and the premium increases as they come with that particular product. But if you have multiple products, you're paying increases and you're paying admin costs on all of those products, and it can actually be bundled into one. Also, I think consumers are struggling a little bit with when tough times hit. Instead of just speaking, and I'm now speaking from a consumer perspective, they don't go and talk to their advisors or financial institutions. And I think if I can use this platform, I would like to just share that consumers must feel comfortable to approach these institutions and must say, I'm going through a bit of a struggle and tough time. What can you do to meet me halfway? Is there a way to reduce my premium but not lose my cover? Is there a way to reduce the benefits, or can I take a holiday, or what is available? What means are available for me to almost strategies to survive tough times, which is very relevant in today. To close off, just to close off, it's important that whatever we are disseminating and that engagement that we have consumers, we must, and the programs that we develop definitely have a sense of quality to ensure that we measure the effectiveness thereof.
Those are such good points, Alicia, and thanks for raising them around the flexibility that's available in the market. And the beauty of today's conversation as well is like we have a regulated structure that gives consumers and financial services providers avenues to kind of get the help they need. And Leanne, coming to you as we wrap up, I think it's important to kind of tackle with this question around oftentimes see the Ombud system being in the favor of consumers but not financial services providers. In your view, like, can you maybe find a way to just dispel that misconception for us?
Yes, indeed, Masidi. Before I do that, I just want to quickly reinforce something Sepati was saying earlier about the importance of sharing information about the Ombud system. It's not just valuable to you, it is a legal obligation. So we do see some financial institutions' documentation is still outdated. It doesn't refer people to the Ombud system, or it still refers them to the old life banking and ombuds who no longer exist, who've been replaced by the NFO. Please be careful. you are actually in contravention of a requirement to give accurate information. But on the question of this perception that the Ombud system is just there to side with the consumers, that is not so. The entire point of the Ombud system is that it is an objective and impartial forum which will carefully weigh both sides of the story. The ombuds are conscious that most of the time they are dealing with ordinary retail customers, often very vulnerable customers, and therefore they will make extra certain that their services enable the voice of that consumer to be heard against the sometimes much stronger, louder, and more well-equipped voice of the financial institution. But that does not mean that they are picking sides. And in fact, if one looks at the data from the Ombud system in terms of the percentage of complaints resolved in favor of consumers as opposed to financial institutions, more complaints are actually found in favor of financial institutions than consumers. And that is not, before any consumers listening to this now think this is the opposite situation, that the schemes are all on the side of the financial institutions. I think it's international. It's internationally known that this is the case, that the majority, somewhat more complaints are decided in favor of financial institutions. And that stands to reason, because if the Ombud system is functioning properly, and if financial institutions themselves handle complaints properly, by the time a complaint reaches the Ombud, it has already been through layers of serious consideration within the financial institution. So, but I would also, in closing, like to urge financial institutions and advisors hearing this to think of complaints data as a valuable resource. It is useful information. It's not only useful information to the regulators to decide what to regulate or what enforcement to take. It is there to enable you to understand whether and to what extent you as an organization may be falling short of delivering those fair outcomes for your customers, and it to enable you to design better structured products and services, proactively responding to these conduct risks. So I really would urge people, think of the complaints process, invest in your complaints management process, use it as useful intelligence, because an empowered consumer is a confident consumer. A confident consumer is more likely to engage with your products and services. It's better for the customer to know that they have this recourse and to feel safe. It's better for you as a financial institution, and it's just better for South Africa as a whole. So really use the service. It's there for free.
And before I wrap up with Sipati Ali, and out of interest, is the complaints data publicly available? Where can people access some of these insights?
So the schemes themselves do publish their comprehensive annual reports. Their websites have a wealth of information about case studies, examples, tips on how to complain. The schemes themselves are open to engaging with financial institutions and associations and so on to see how they can assist use of the system. And the Ombud Council also we publish our annual reports. Obviously, one needs to be careful of any individual information. This is highly personal information that the schemes deal with, but there really is lots of information available on the websites and the social media platforms of the schemes. And people are also very welcome to go to ombudcouncil.org.za, and we've got lots of links to additional information should it be required.
So just to wrap up with you, Sipati, if we could take a forward-looking approach around what a trusted financial system, could look like for South Africa, where this all stacks up very well in favor of the consumer. How is the Treasury contributing towards that, or would like to contribute towards that?
I think we've already put in place the foundation and the systems in terms of the legislative reforms that are that are ongoing. However, in 5 years' time, I think a trusted financial system would be one where consumers can participate with confidence, understanding how the system works, knowing their rights, and clear that when something goes wrong, they know where to go. And I think also we also seeing that the technology is also playing a huge role in terms of how the financial sector is really evolving. I think we are also going to have to ensure that the consumers are digitally, they have digital financial literacy to be able to engage with these new products, but also in terms of our ombuds themselves, they would also need to be upskilled in terms of ensuring that they keep up to date and with the development, so that they are well placed to be able to ensure that we've got an effective system that is working as it should. And I think with we've seen the awareness that has already, there's been an improvement in terms of customer awareness with regards to the Ombud system. And for example, the two pot system reforms and the complaints that came up there, bringing such underlying issues to sharper focus. So the great engagement is great engagement is really, really working for us. And I'm hoping that, there is the Ombud Council is as one of the projects for the coming years is to have a baseline, to conduct a baseline survey, so that we are able to see in 5 years' time whether these efforts that we are engaging in to try and raise awareness, whether those are bearing fruits, and consumers, the consumers' awareness around the complaints process has improved. And even in terms of the numbers, the reach of the Ombud system, the geographical reach, that's also important from a financial inclusion perspective. And just lastly, we are aware that South Africa has a sophisticated financial sector, and we are also already seeing our Ombud system leading in the continent, being called upon to help out with best practice when it comes to Ombud systems. So in 5 years' time, we are hoping that this knowledge and expertise will be extending beyond the continent. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's great to hear that we are making such profound progress. And it's really been a really awesome opportunity to chat to you, Leanne, Alicia, and Sipati. Thank you very much for shedding light on a very critical system, being the Ombud system in our financial ecosystem. And my hope is that this is the beginning of far greater and more richer discussions around its importance. So thank you to you all for joining us. And to you, our viewers, we hope that you found this very useful and insightful. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Many thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.